Hello, and welcome to episode 107 of Design Curious Podcast. I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. Today on the podcast, I'm talking about charging hourly as the method that you should use for capturing your design fees and billing the client. I know this is a hot topic. That's why I'm smiling, because I've seen all the discussions on Facebook, on Instagram, and every design coach is advertising and will have a different method that they stand by and are adamant that, like, oh, you should never have to track your time again. You should never charge a flat fee again. You should never charge square footage again. And so which one is the right one and which one works for you? Well, we're going to get into that in that episode. Before we go there, though, I want to remind you that I have my online mentorship program. If you're trying to figure out what the best method of charging is for your business, or if you don't even know the first thing about capturing your design fees, you might want to get into my Design Mentor, and I can work with you there to get your career started the right way. All the links will be in the show notes for you. And now let's talk about the hourly design fee method and tracking your time. You're now listening to Design Curious, a place where you, creative one, are here to learn about what it really is like to be an interior designer. And I'm your host and mentor, Rebecca Ward. If you're worried about how to succeed in a creative career, if you're ready to learn your next steps to become an interior designer, and if you want the satisfaction of doing something you love every day, you are in the right place. Grab a coffee, a notebook, and let's dig into today's episode. So the topic of tracking your time is definitely a hot button for several designers, several design coaches. Everyone has their own approach to how you should charge for your design fees, and you'll see that everyone has a justification for why they think their method is the best, and it might work well for them. I ascribe to hourly design fees, so charging for every minute that you're working on the job and sending that invoice off to the client. Now, there are a lot of arguments, pro and cons, for tracking your time for interior designers, and I'll just say that I've had many conversations about tracking time with my colleagues, with my people in my program, and I'm the first to admit it's something that I really do not like doing. I do not like tracking every minute of my day, and for a lot of people, it can feel constraining. I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I think it's really important to bring it up again because it's just really so debated out there. And so I will tell you why I think that you should charge for your time and not just value-based projects. I'll tell you, first of all, the different methods that certain designers will tell you how they can charge for their fees. So I'm coming from the perspective of that I primarily do residential remodel. When you are working on residential remodels, there are a myriad of potential problems and potential obstacles that could happen in the project. You're dealing with a very confined space. There's a lot of problem solving. Like I mentioned before, that's one of my favorite parts. And usually these spaces are smaller, like the homes are not 30,000 square feet estates. They are usually 3,000 to 6,000 single family homes that are being remodeled. So I think that for this scenario, which is the majority of my clients, that working hourly, tracking my time, sending the client the invoice at the end of the month for all of the time that has been billed on the project is the best way to capture all of the unknowns and not have to keep rewriting or the contract or writing addendums to the contract because the scope of work has changed every time we open a wall. So this is the best method to keep continually working on the project, moving forward. The client has a rough idea of what to expect, but I would say 30% of the time we are going over what my estimated fees are because of whatever unknown project or obstacle we came across. Yes, I hate tracking my time minute by minute every day and trying to see like, okay, I worked for 8 hours today. What exactly was I doing? And so I enlist the help of software to do that. As I've mentioned before, Harvest is my time tracking software. It integrates well with QuickBooks if you're using that as the accounting method. I currently switched over to Studio Designer for my accounting. Currently, I'm looking at trying to use their time tracking within the software, which is a little bit different than Harvest, so it's just going to take me some time to work over in Studio Designer solely. So for now, I kind of do them both side by side, which is a little bit more time than I should be spending on it, but we'll get there eventually. But Harvest is great, especially when you're first starting out. It's minimal cost, and they have an app on your phone. So if you're out and about, you can track, you can go back and add time in if you forgot to add it for that day, adjust it. You can set a budget for the project and say, I estimated $60,000 for this project in design fees. Where are we at so far, or are we going over? So that is a great tool that you can use to track your time. But I've had so many discussions about how hard it is to remember to track your time, and it is. And so you just have to do the hard work of figuring out a system that works for you, whether that's writing it down on a tablet, taking notes on your phone, and then going back and entering it into software. But one way or another, you need to capture that time, first of all, so that you can get paid for it. But secondly, so you have the data to know how much you are spending on a project in certain phases of the project, and how you can estimate for future projects, and knowing what size projects bring in a certain amount of design fees. And, it could be that you find out that your smaller remodels are taking more time because there's more precision that you need to do, whereas maybe a 6,000 square foot has more wiggle room. So you never know until you have the data, and that data is so important. And I'm not a data person. I'm not a numbers girl. I'm not great with being precise. I don't like spreadsheets, but I am a stickler for this, hacking your time, because I want to make sure that I get paid for my time so that I can pay my employee well, and that we are making a profit at the end of the day and not breaking even. Because for so many years, I did only just break even, and I am done with that. And so this is what I found works for me. Now, going outside of residential remodels, single family homes, I could entertain doing maybe a fixed fee, especially for commercial design, maybe for new builds up through the design phase. You could do a fixed fee because you have a lot of control over the scope of that work. It's likely not to change at all. And you kind of have a great idea of your process, how many hours each thing normally takes, and it rarely will vary from that. Then, go ahead and do a fixed fee. I always say that if you're going to charge a fixed fee, that you should add a premium onto that, because humans are really bad at estimating. And so if you think it's going to be $20,000, add like an extra 10% onto that, just because you don't know how much time you really spend on things. And you always underestimate, like, oh, I've only been doing this for 2 hours, and you look up and it's been 4. So gives yourself some room to explore in that fixed fee model. But once you go into the project management, like I talked about in episode 103, you're going to want to probably retain that on an hourly basis, because, like I said, you don't know what's going to happen on the job site. You might need to be there all day long. And does your contract and design fees cover that? So things to consider. Other designers will say that they do the square footage model. So it's pricing per square foot. So you might do like $10 up to $30 per square foot. This works great if you're working on those estates, because there's going to be a lot of hallways, a lot of empty spaces that don't need a lot of specific ornamentation or design, so that the time that you're spent on all the other rooms, especially bathrooms, kitchens, back kitchens, bedrooms, those take so much detail that it would balance out the amount of time that you're spending in the rooms themselves. So that's kind of how I see a square foot model working best would be for large projects, either residential or commercial, probably. Another method that I don't do here in California because I cannot act as a contractor without a contractor's license. But in some states, you might be able to do cost plus. So if you are actually hiring all of the subcontractors for the client, you can act like a general and add, 20% onto whatever their fees are in order for you to make profit and overhead like a general contractor typically would. That gets into an area I'm not as familiar with, so I would definitely recommend you to talk to someone who is currently doing that method in order to understand the ins and outs and benefits of doing that. But there's another way to add profit into your business. And of course, we've talked before about furniture being another way to make your fees, but I wouldn't only rely on markups for your fees. So if you're ordering furniture for a client, then you should also be charging a design fee as well. So whether that's your time, a flat fee, the markup itself doesn't necessarily include or shouldn't include your time. You have so many other overhead costs, plus you need a certain percentage of profit in your business to make it a successful business. So only doing markup, unless you're a full retail store where you can mark up things 2 or 3 times, then I wouldn't recommend that method for you. So you're going to pick the method that is best for you based on your experience. And if you're just starting out, like most of my listeners are, you won't have the experience or knowledge to know how much a typical project will take of your time. And so that is why I always recommend the hourly method. And you're just going to have to bite the bullet and track your time. Put reminders everywhere in your phone, like every hour, say like, have you tracked your time, until it becomes a habit. Even now that I've been doing it very faithfully for years, I still will get lost in the weeds and look up and say, oh, shoot, I'm not tracking my time. And of course, I have people working for me. So sometimes we're working on the same project. Like, oops, I forgot to track that. What are your hours? What do you say for this? And then usually I can capture that time again and add it back in. So yes, definitely I'm a proponent of the hourly tracking. I don't see an easy way around it, although there are probably some great other softwares out there. Harvest has been great for me. And like I said, Studio Designer has their own time tracking. I believe other design-specific softwares also have time tracking components. We've looked into and played around with others, but haven't really found one that we're comfortable with, probably just because we've been using Harvest for so long. We really know how that one works well. I believe Toggle was one that we started out using before transferring over to Harvest. One of the reasons why we were using Harvest as well is because it used to integrate with Asana, where we could have a timer in Asana for Harvest. So whenever we were working on a task that was listed out in Asana, we just hit the timer in there, and then it would send all that data, the task plus the time it took, to Harvest to track. They kind of took that integration away, which made it really inconvenient for us because now we have to just type in our task into the Harvest time tracker instead of just it already being there because we put it in Asana. So there's some redundant things now that we're doing and I'm looking at our methods. And so that's partly why I'm looking at Studio Designer for that time tracking, because then it'll already be in there and I just hit the invoice button to send all of that time out to the client at the end of the month. Another thing to keep in mind as you're tracking your time, that of course you're going to review it, but to not eliminate any time well spent on the project just because you're afraid the client is not going to like the number that they see at the bottom of the invoice. If it was time spent on the project, you should be unapologetically billing it to them, especially if it was very ethically done, especially if it was time that you were actually working. Now, if you forgot about your timer and it kept going, you're obviously going to adjust to that and take that off. But otherwise, I think we will assume that the client is going to have an issue with the invoice and take time off. And so I'm recommending not to do that because you need to be paid. There's other things besides just yourself that's riding on these numbers. It's the health of your business. You may have employees, you may have family, you're bringing money home too. So don't cut them short by taking out time from your invoice because you're worried about what the client might think. Let them look at it and decide for themselves. But your time is your time, and you've already laid it out in your contract that you're going to be billing them monthly for every hour spent on the project. Like I said before, I do 5-minute increments. Some people will do 10 or 15, I think is most common. I have a challenge of working in blocks of time unless it's design time. Otherwise, I'm like answering this email, answering that email for a client. And so that's why I like to do 5-minute increments, because that kind of usually will be the minimum that I'm spending on a client at a time, and I kind of bounce around. I know that's not the best method for working and having focused time, but that's kind of what I end up doing, especially probably just being the owner of the business. There's so many hats you have to wear. So I am bouncing around like that. But on design days where I'm like in the design, selecting finishes, whatever it is, then I usually have big chunks of like 3 to 4 hours that I'm working on things at a time. The time just flies by. I would be remiss if I didn't say also that when you are charging hourly, I'm sure I've said this before, but when you're starting out, I would charge no less than $100, probably $125 should be your starting rate. And it just goes up from there. Historically, designers undercharge for their time, undervalue themselves, and you want to make sure you're covering all of your expenses and as well making a profit, like I said. So don't be afraid to periodically raise your rates. It's always a good time at the beginning of the year just to let all your clients know the rates are going up. Because everything else is going up. You've seen the inflation, price of food, gas, everything's a lot more expensive. And so periodically you need to be raising your rate as well. So that is what I think about tracking time and charging hourly. And I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I'm just here to tell you what works for me. So I know, controversial topic, but I think it's really important and I stand behind what I say on the tracking your time. I mean, really, your time is one of your expenses in your business. Whether you are charging flat fee, square footage, or charging for your time by hourly rate, you should be tracking your time. It's a data, it's a commodity. Your time is limited. You need to know where it is being spent and how many hours are being spent. Even if you're spending it on advertising time, PR time, or building your website, you need to know how long you're taking to do that as opposed to your design time. How much time are you actually designing as the owner of the business? So the more data, the better. Your time is an expense to your business, and so that's why I think regardless of the method that you're choosing, you still need to track your time. I know, sad news, but get over it and do the hard thing because you can do hard things. That's what I keep telling everybody around me. I tell my kids, I tell my employees, I tell myself that I can do hard things. And so that is my advice for you today. Next week, I'll have another great episode. So until then, stay creative. Thanks for listening. If you love this episode, please leave a rating and a review. This helps me reach other curious creatives like you. If you have a topic request or would like to contact me, simply head over to my website, rwarddesign.com, or email me at podcast@rwarddesign.com.